Hi guys, and welcome to another Wisdom Wednesday. Today I'm talking about conditioning for boxing. So first things first, I'm going to go through a few mistakes that I made in my boxing career when I was an amateur. To know what I know now as a strength and conditioning coach, what I would have given to have been able to apply this knowledge when I was actually boxing as an amateur. So first things first, getting tired versus getting better. One of my coaching inspirations, Dan John, is in the picture, has a quote that's something like, any idiot can get you tired, but do you get better? 10,000 burpees, that'll make you tired, but will it make you better? A lot of what I see in boxing gyms, and certainly from my own experience, is more. We can do more circuits, more sprints, more long distance runs, but do we get better? Ultimately, there's always going to be a trade-off between training and recovery, and at some point there's a law of diminishing returns. You can't keep training and expecting there not to be a negative impact if this is out of balance. Case in point, Manny Pacquiao and Ricky Hatton. Apparently Ricky Hatton said that he felt like he was in the shape of his life about 2 or 3 weeks beforehand. All came crashing down. You can only dig yourself out of a hole so many times before you can't physically get out of it. Improper sequencing of training is another one. You can't just decide to do any given workout on any given day and think that that's not going to be, or to think that's going to be better than somehow logically sequencing your training with a scientific underpinning. Case in point, if you try to learn A levels in the middle of your GCSEs, is that going to be as effective as if it was sequenced logically? There's a reason why schools do this, and there's a reason why you should be sequencing your training too. And as I said, under recovering and overtraining. If you imagine your development as a boxer as a bit of a hole. When you train, you dig a hole. When you recover, so for example, sleeping, eating the right things, any mobility and any other massages or whatever you need to recover, that's filling the hole back up. If you don't fill the hole back up appropriately, then you're not going to get better. So just as under training is an issue, under recovering is also an issue. So the first thing to improving conditioning for boxing comes down to how you define the sport. It's not a long, slow endurance sport. Yes, we want a good aerobic system, but I'm going to explain how there's better methods of improving the aerobic system, which is ultimately going to underpin our ability to repeat those explosive efforts. So first things first, are you efficient? Now, Floyd Mayweather may or may not be the fittest boxer on the planet, but one thing's for certain for anyone who does follow boxing is he is the most economical. He does not waste a punch. When it comes to efficiency, if you can do all the conditioning you want, but if, for example, your footwork's off or it takes you a lot of energy to move around the ring, then that conditioning is only going to have a limited effect. So before we even talk about strength and conditioning side of things, be as efficient as you can as a boxer. Now I'm going to stay in my lane as a strength and conditioning coach and move swiftly on, but efficiency is king both in boxing and running, which I'll get to in a second. Are you explosive? So you can't endure a quality that you haven't got in the first place. And again, I'll delve more into that later. But for the analogy's sake, this is your gears in a car. If you've only got 2 gears, doesn't matter how big your engine is because you've only got 2 gears. And finally, are you sustainable? No point having, for example, 6 gears in a car if you've got an engine that means you're going to be out of gas when you get a mile down the road. So firstly, let's talk about improving efficiency. So efficiency in running terms is how much oxygen it costs your body to run at a certain speed. And again, if you want to put into boxing terms, how much oxygen it costs you to reach a certain punch output. So how do you improve running efficiency? Because running efficiency is going to determine what speeds you can run at for what periods of time. Plyometrics. By improving the stiffness of your ankle, so making your ankle more of a spring than a sponge with various jumping exercises, that is going to improve your running economy. Equally, being taught how to sprint technically efficiently. So for example, hitting the right positions with the right timing and then adding some power through the stride. Learn to sprint well, and that's going to impact your conditioning because you'll be able to generate a higher intensity. Being able to generate a higher intensity is going to mean that your heart and lungs adapt to being able to deal with this higher intensity, and that's obviously going to carry over into your boxing. So improving the engine, start with why. Should we do long, slow distance runs? Now, my opinion on this changes depending on who I speak to, but first and foremost, it's not an endurance sport. However, you do need a minimum base of aerobic work. Are long, slow distance runs the best way to achieve this base? Not necessarily. Is there anything wrong with slow distance runs? Now, if you're doing them for example, the need to brush off the cobwebs or recovery and just pumping blood to the muscles, if you're running at about a 3 out of 10 intensity, you probably get away with it, especially if you're well trained. However, if it's more than a 3 out of 10 intensity, you're getting into what is called no man's land. This is an intensity where the intensity is high enough that there's going to be an impact to your recovery, but it's low enough where you're not really pushing the ceiling and forcing your body or your heart or your lungs to physiologically adapt. I've spoken to professional boxers who, and come at it from my scientific point of view, they've said, for example, in camp, that sometimes it's nice just to zone out and running is what helps them. And also there might be a weight management aspect of this. Obviously the recovery cost to a long, slow run is going to be calorifically more expensive than, for example, a 30-second run. But ideally we shouldn't be coming into camp with our main focus being weight management. You can either have performance or you can have weight management. You can't really have both. If you're an amateur boxer and you're straying too far off your weight, that's going to be a problem from a physiological perspective, because you're not going to be able to hit the high intensities you need in order to make your body adapt. So long, slow runs, if you want to do them 3 out of 10 intensity, anything more than that, then really you're not really getting anything out of it. Should you do it for physiological performance? If you're at a stage where long, slow runs are going to be what's improving your physiological performance, you're probably not fit enough to be in the ring. So now let's talk about improving recoverability. So the fancy term for this is buffering capacity. So the ability to recover between high intensity efforts. Now, this is one bit of research that I really like, and I'm happy to send over references to anyone who wants them. But Bishop did a key study that looked at the optimal intensity for improving this recoverability. So he tested different intensities and found that 80% was the optimal intensity for improving the ability to recover between high intensity efforts. Interestingly, to test it wasn't a fluke. They tested 90%, 100% and 110% and found some of these intensities were actually harmful to the ability to recover between intense work. So using the car analogy once more isn't necessarily always better. There's no point having 10 exhausts because they don't serve any more function to the car. Equally, there's no point going to a higher intensity than you need if the physiological adaptation you're after is recoverability or improving that buffering capacity. This is why I love using the golden circle. Start with why. When you're designing a physical performance program, you should be looking at the physiological adaptation first, then how you can achieve it, and finally what exercises you're going to do. The way you perform an exercise will determine the adaptation. So saying you're just doing running could be anything from that 3 out of 10 intensity long slow run, or it could be 30 seconds blitzing yourself in a sprint. So it's not what you do, it's how you do it. So once you've improved your ability to steer, i.e. for example your coordination or your running or boxing economy, and the engine, it's time to talk about improving the gears. Now, full disclaimer, this picture is borrowed from Boxing Science. I don't own the rights to it, but it does a lovely job of contextualizing what is known as the force velocity curve in relation to boxing. So as I said, you cannot endure a quality that you don't have. So in order to improve repeated sprint ability, or the ability to be repeatedly explosive, we need to get explosive in the first place. And what this is going to mean is shifting this force velocity curve up and to the right. What that's going to do is that's going to mean we are producing more force in less time. But in order to produce more force first, that's where we need to lay our focus. So increasing force production means we are getting stronger. In boxing, the power is obviously driven from the legs, but there's still going to be a little bit of an upper body involvement. So you're going to want to stick to compound lifts by and large. So stuff like squats, deadlifts are going to be excellent for improving leg strength. You're going to want to keep the rep ranges low. What this is going to do by keeping rep ranges low, staying away from failure, that's going to ensure that we avoid building unnecessary muscle mass. Now, when I speak to boxers, their main concern is they'll put on muscle and it'll slow them down. Muscle isn't inherently the problem because more muscle allows us to produce more force. However, if that extra muscle is taking you into a weight division that's not ideal, then that may well be a bit of a problem. The higher reps are fine if you are just learning the movement pattern. It's not too intense. So for example, if you're doing 10 reps on the goblet squat, then realistically that's not really going to be heavy enough to add muscle. If you're training like a bodybuilder and you're performing, say, 5 sets of 10 with a 90-second rest and every set is nearly to failure, that's when you're going to run into issues. Condition or strength training for a boxer should look very different to strength training for a bodybuilder. Once you've improved the amount of force you can produce, i.e. your strength, you're going to want to improve the rate at which you can produce this force. This is where exercises like plyometrics and sprints are going to come in, because you're using this increased force production in a much quicker velocity. Again, speed kills in boxing, but you probably want some strength to underpin that. Even if your strength training isn't necessarily getting you quicker, it's still going to be helping reduce the risk of injuries. Stronger athletes are more resilient than weaker athletes, and if you go for a 12-week camp and you're getting injured, then that's going to have a massive impact on the conditioning you're able to do. Finally, improving the gears part 2. So the conditioning session that I know a lot of explosive boxers hate the most is something like a 30-second all-out effort. If you're explosive enough, a 30-second max effort of sprinting should absolutely bury you, and you will need that 3 to 5 minute rest period in order to generate that high intensity. Now, these 30-second efforts are going to be what's designed to help you force a stoppage. For example, you've got somebody on the ropes, you need to put them away, you need to maintain as high intensity as you can for that short duration, and if that stoppage doesn't come off, then you need to know you've got enough of an aerobic engine to recover in between this effort and to make sure that you don't subsequently end up getting stopped yourself. How many times have we seen a boxer go for a stoppage and then they blow their tank and then the other boxer ends up coming on strong? You don't want to be in the situation where either A, you don't have the physical capacity to stop your opponent when you could have put them away when you had the chance, and B, you don't want them to stop you because you've got no energy left in the tank and you're just laying against the ropes, letting them tee off on you. So how do we put this all together in a training program? This is something that I've put on my Patreon as an 8-week sample program. I've also got episode 1 of the Platform to Perform podcast where I discuss practical applications for the conditioning of boxers. If you have any questions for me following this, then feel free to contact me via the appropriate channels. But in summing up, we need boxers to have the steering, i.e. be economical from a running standpoint and a boxing standpoint, because we're going to minimize the energy expended in the ring itself. But we still want the engine to last as long as we need to, and we need to be explosive enough to go through the gears. As I said, having a decent aerobic system is going to help us repeat these explosive efforts, but ultimately we need all three. We need to produce force, so we need to be strong, and we need to have enough in the tank to keep producing this force over time and do so quickly. And finally, any idiot can make you tired. If your trainer, coach, whatever, cannot explain exactly why you're doing the session you're doing, why you are working at the intensities you're working at, why there's the dictated amount of rest that there is, then you need to be having a long, hard think about it. When I used to intern at, with GB Boxing, one of the posters they had on the wall that I absolutely loved and rings true for me when it comes to boxing says, "Everyone has the will to win. Not everyone has the will to prepare." If you have the will to prepare and would like to hear more, then as I said, you can jump on my Patreon and download an 8-week sample program. Equally, you can come to me by the following methods. I hope you found this useful. Catch you again. All the best.